Chapter 27. The Queen snatched the cane from my hand. "This doesn't belong to you," she said. "You're a hunter and a thief." She broke the cane in half, threw one half to the floor and held up the other. The wood was sharp and jagged where she'd broken it. Before I knew what was happening, she had me in a firm grip and pushed me into a crouch in front of Dimmy. The broken cane was in my hand, the sharp wooden end pointed at my friend. "He won't drink blood," the Queen whispered in my ear. "I've spent all this time finding the gem, and now he won't drink, so he is of no use to me." Dimmy was still clutching his broken finger. His eyes travelled down to the broken cane, and his face blanched. "You see," the Queen whispered, "the witches put their magic on him. Blood can't touch him. So I found the lacuna gem to block their magic. But the prophecy won't come true if he is forced to drink. It has to be his choice." She wrapped her hand around mine and pushed the cane towards Dimmy's heart. With all my strength I fought, but she was far stronger than me. The cane inched closer and closer to Dimmy's chest. "No," I begged. "Please stop." The Queen pushed harder. "But this is what you were born to do," she whispered. "You can't tell me you haven't thought about it. He's a vampire. I bet part of you wants to kill him." "No!" I shouted. I tried to escape her, tried to move my arms, tried to move my legs, but she held me as if she was made of stone. I couldn't escape. In my panic, I felt a gentle touch on my shoulder. It was Dimmy. The cane was less than a centimetre from piercing his skin, but he didn't look afraid anymore. "It's okay," he said. "It isn't your fault." Without warning, the cane stopped moving. The Queen gasped. For a moment, I thought she was hurt, but then she spun the cane around and pointed it at my chest. "I have a better idea," she said. She beckoned to the elderly vampire. The old woman shuffled towards us, the goblet of blood in her wrinkled hand. Bowing her head, she held out the golden cup to Dimmy. At first, he didn't take it. "Here's the new plan," the Queen said to him. "Drink the blood, or I'll kill your friend." I gasped. As the cup was brought closer to him, Dimmy's lips trembled. "Don't do it," I said. "If you drink it, your heart will turn cold." He took one look at the cane pointing at my chest, and then took the goblet from the elderly woman's hands. He closed his eyes. "I don't want to be evil," he said, "but I don't want you to die." Dimmy opened his mouth. Slowly, he brought the goblet to his lips. "No!" I shouted. Out of nowhere, a black shape flapped between us and knocked the goblet out of Dimmy's hand. Blood splashed across the deck. The shape landed upside down on the railing. I stared at it in shock. It was a bat. It flapped its wings twice, then its wings grew. They morphed into a cloak. When the cloak stopped spinning, it settled around the shoulders of a man, a vampire. The Queen released me and shot to the other side of the platform. The elderly woman crawled away towards the railings, her thin body shaking. The stranger and the Queen stared at each other. After a moment of silence, the man laid a hand on Dimmy's shoulder. "Vladimir," he said, "are you all right?" Dimmy's eyes began to water. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. I'm okay." "Dad?" I stared up at the man in shock. He met my gaze with a distrustful look. His eyes were a darker purple than Dimmy's, and his face was much sharper. My insides twisted. "We'll need to talk about this when we get home," he said to Dimmy, still staring daggers at me. He had an accent. I remembered Dimmy had said his dad was from Romania. "Lily," he said to the Queen. The way he said it, it was as if he knew her. Dimmy and I exchanged a glance. His father knew the Queen. I couldn't see her face, but she seemed unnerved. "I thought you were in Romania," she said. "No," he replied. "The witches brought me to Brightwood to protect Dimmy from something like this." The Queen clutched at the railing. Her legs seemed to give way beneath her. Dimmy's father stepped forward. "Stay back," she yelled. The lights smashed, one by one, until the ship had been plunged into darkness. Shadows crawled around her body. Black fog spiraled up her arms. "It was you who broke into my house," Dimmy's father accused. "I didn't know it was your house," she answered. "You tried to kidnap my son," he said. The Queen winced. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Your name, your scent." "The witches changed them," he told her flatly, "to keep us hidden." "I had no idea who he was." She seemed to be talking to herself more than anyone else. The moonlight shone faintly on the hood of her cloak. Underneath it, I could see her lips trembling. "Lily," he said again. Her jaw clenched and she rose to her feet. I couldn't be sure, but I thought she was staring at Dimmy. A moment later, she swiveled on the spot. Her cloak twisted around her, and she shrank into a ball of shadows that writhed in the air and then transformed into a bat. "Wait!" Dimmy's father yelled, but the Queen had already flapped away into the darkness. Beside me, Dimmy's brow furrowed. He contemplated the puddle of blood on the deck and brushed his lips. Next to the puddle, the golden cup lay on its side. He yanked the bracelet off and threw it onto the deck. Immediately, the puddle of blood began to inch away from him. "It's over," I whispered. "You didn't drink it. You're okay." He lifted his hand. His broken finger had healed. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'm okay, I think." I was about to tell him I was sorry for everything, but I was distracted when Mum appeared at the top of the steps, carrying her stake. She was dripping wet. She must have swum Bane and April back to the beach by herself. Her eyes widened as she looked from me to Dimmy's father to the elderly vampire cowering in the corner, and then finally to Dimmy. "You must be Vladimir Knox," she said, her tone cold. "You and every other vampire on this ship are under arrest." Chapter 28. Mum raised her weapon threateningly. The stake was made of ebony. I could tell by its dark, almost black colour, and it had been whittled to a horribly sharp point. "You've been working with the Queen," she said to Dimmy. "You are dangerous. Your actions have brought harm to my daughter. You will be taken to Traxxas. I've already contacted headquarters. A team of hunters is on its way to capture you." Dimmy tugged fearfully at his chains. They rattled, but they did not break. I reached for the cuffs around his wrists and tried to prise them open. They wouldn't budge. His eyes were frantic. "You're trapped here," Mum said. "You will not leave." "You're a vampire-hating fool," Dimmy's father told her. "And one day you will regret the things you have done." His jaw was tight, and I got the feeling he was restraining himself. "I'm no fool," she replied, "and I look forward to seeing your face when you walk through those gates into Traxxas. Believe me, you won't be so confident then. I will never go there, and neither will my son." "Oh, yes, he will," she said, "and I don't think he'll last a day." The thought of Dimmy in a prison full of evil vampires made me shiver. He wouldn't survive. He was too good, too sweet and kind. How could Mum not see that? Before I knew what I was doing, I was on my feet. Mum stepped forward, but I blocked her path. "You can't do this," I said. "I won't let you." Behind me, there was a clank. Mum tried to pass me, but I stood in her way. "Henrietta!" she shouted. She tried to push me aside, but I wouldn't move. I grabbed her arms. "You can't do this." But she didn't answer. Her attention was focused on something else. I turned to see Dimmy standing next to his father. His chains were broken. He scrunched up his face in concentration, and then his hair twisted and his shirt turned black. His body folded in on itself. At first, I gasped, afraid something was wrong. But a moment later, he transformed into a bat with purple ears and big round eyes. Beside him, his father had also changed. They didn't waste a moment. As soon as they were airborne, they flapped away into the darkness. Dimmy, smaller and clumsier than his father. Angrily, Mum shoved me aside. She ran to catch up with them, but she reached the railing too late. She hung over the edge, staring after the two bats. "I'm sorry, Mum," I said. She said nothing. She didn't even look at me. She lifted the ebony stake and threw it with perfect aim at the elderly vampire. The woman shrieked as it hit her in the chest. Her skin turned grey, then black, and finally she disintegrated to dust. The wind carried the specks away across the ocean. Without thinking, I ran over to the spot and tried to grab the dust, but it blew away on the wind. She was gone. I clutched my throat, my stomach turning over. I thought I was going to be sick. I'd never seen anyone die before, and Mum had killed her. I stepped back. Where the vampire had been a few moments ago, there were now only a few flecks of ash. Mum's shoulders sagged for a moment, but then she straightened them and marched off the platform. I watched her leave, feeling like I didn't know her at all. I breathed in the sea air. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the last few specks of dust. I brushed them away with my hand, and they floated off on the wind. Glittering in the blood-red light, the lacuna gem caught my eye. its black surface darker than the night. I snatched it up and hid it in the pocket of my hoodie. Then I picked up the ebony stake and flung it into the ocean. It landed with a splash and sank beneath the waves. Chapter 29. When the hunters arrived with their white military-style uniforms, I was taken by boat back to the cove. April was waiting, her hair and clothes dripping. As soon as I was on solid ground, I collapsed. I lay flat on the sand and drew in deep breaths. I'd never ached so much in my life. My back was sore, my arms were shaky. I wobbled when April leaned over and helped lift me up. Before she could say anything, I hugged her. When she drew away, her eyes were frantic. "What happened to Dimmy?" she asked. A smile tugged at my mouth. "He's okay. He got away." She raised her eyebrows. "You're not angry?" "I was wrong," I said. "Dimmy's good. He was always good." The words warmed her features. Her hair seemed to glow with golden light. I gazed down at the yellow crystal hanging from her neck. That's when I noticed the thin, zigzagging crack running through the middle of it. "Skull broke it," I said. She nodded. "He must have done it when he stabbed me." The memory of it made me wince. "I thought he was going to kill you," I said. "The necklace protected me," she said. "I'm okay." An image of the yellow light popped into my mind. I remembered the way it had smashed into Skull and thrown him in the pool. "I'm sorry," I told her. "I was useless. Skull would have killed both of us if it hadn't have been for you." "I'm fine," she said, but there was something sad in her eyes. "What is it?" "It's nothing." She tugged at the necklace as if she wanted to pull it off. "It's Bane we should be worrying about," she said. "As soon as the hunters got here, they rushed him to hospital. He looked so pale." "He'll be okay," I said, trying to reassure her. "I hope so," she replied. "I tried to call an ambulance, but your mum took my phone to contact the hunters instead. She left me here to wait for them. I didn't know what to do. I thought Bane was going to die." "He didn't," I reassured her. "He won't." We fell silent. A shadow loomed above us, a hunter. He motioned for me to follow him. I didn't want to leave April behind, but I could see Mum in the distance, and I didn't dare make her wait. Another hunter approached and said he would stay with April until her grandma arrived to pick her up. I hugged April goodbye and made my way across the beach, where some cars with blacked-out windows waited. Mum sat in the back seat with me while a pair of hunters silently drove us home. She bunched her fists, her knuckles white. Anger radiated off her in waves. Dimmy and his father had escaped, not to mention the Queen. Mum's mission had been a failure. As we sat side by side, I wondered if the Queen's story was true. Had my mother really lied to Hunter's Corp? Had she really pretended the Queen's family had murdered people just so the hunters would attack them? I was about to take her hand, but thought better of it. "Dad's probably worried sick," I said. No answer. She kept her head turned towards the window. "He'll be glad to see you," I told her. "He even thought about ringing the police when you went missing." Her fingers twitched, but other than that, she didn't react. My heart sinking, I gazed out of the window. It was a still night. The sky was clear and I counted the stars, thinking about everything that had happened. April was a witch. Bane definitely wasn't a vampire. And Dimmy was a blood-sucking monster with a pure heart. So he wasn't really a monster at all. I wasn't sure about his father. There was also the Queen. She'd got away. Where would she go? Would she come back? And how did Dimmy's father know her? I thought about her story. She had a husband and a child. A suspicion nagged at me. How old was her child now? Just as the question entered my mind, I saw two shapes flapping across the sky, silhouetted against the moon. A large bat and a smaller one. Dimmy, what happened to your mum? I thought. You said she was dead, but what if you were wrong? What if she isn't dead at all? I watched the two bats disappear and wondered if Dimmy had suspicions too. Did he wonder how his father knew the Queen? Had they simply been friends, or had they been something more? If she'd been his partner, his wife even, that meant Dimmy was... I couldn't let myself finish that thought. The prophecy said he would become cruel and powerful. Surely he wouldn't end up having an evil vampire queen as a mother too. I didn't know if my guess was right, but I knew, one way or another, I had to keep Dimmy safe. It didn't matter who his parents were. Dimmy was a vampire who couldn't touch blood. He was good, and he was my friend, and I wouldn't let anyone hurt him. As we pulled up outside our house, a voice came out of the car's radio. All vampires have been captured and are being sent to Traxxas, the voice said. Mum reached across and grabbed the radio. Confirm how many vampires in total. 3. Mum thought for a moment, then frowned. I tried to remember how many vampires had been left on the ship. The Queen had escaped, and the elderly vampire had died. That left Skull, the pointy-chinned vampire, the handsome one, and the muscly one I threw over the railing. There should have been 4. The vampire in the pool, Mum said. Tell me you captured the vampire floating in the pool. There was a long silence before the man on the other end of the radio answered. There was no vampire in the pool, ma'am. It was empty. My breath hitched. It couldn't be possible. Skull was out there somewhere, alive. This has been Etty STEELE, Vampire Hunter, the Hunter series. Written by Grayson Grave. Narrated by Jodie Hollie-Anne. Copyright 2018 by Grayson Grave. Production copyright 2018 by Grayson Grave.